Welcome. I'm Steph, an intuitive hypnotist from Quebec, Canada.
I'm Julie, a past life regression hypnotist and Reiki healer from Wisconsin.
And together, we are the Soulful Mystics. Welcome, Mystics, and happy Halloween. We saved the creepiest of Mary stories for last. This is part 2 of Mary's haunted house saga. If you haven't listened to part 1, which is episode 35, A Haunted House, Shadow Figures, and Creepy Children, it's a must listen to. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Your support fuels our mystical exploration, and your reviews inspire us to keep sharing our voices and stories. This review is from TGF Niffer. Julie and Steph are the real deal. Well-trained, conscientious, kind, high-integrity hypnotists. Having worked with both of them in PLR sessions, I highly recommend them. The podcast is a great way to get to know them both and about the experience before trying it. And you need to try it. It's a highly effective healing strategy, and you're in good hands working with them. Thank you so much. This means the world to us, and we were so excited to have a client want to work with both of us. If you've been thinking of booking a session and you want to work with the amazing Julie, you can find out more about her and her services at soulseekerhypnosis.com or on Instagram at soulseekerhypnosis. And if you want to work with me, you can find out more at soulfulstephanie.com or on Instagram at soulfulstephaniehypnosis. We would both love to hear from you. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or just want to say hi, please send us an email or DM us on Insta at Soulful Mystics Podcast. Here is part 2.
I think the creepiest thing Mason ever did when he was little was there were so many times where I would wake up in the middle of the night to see him standing in the middle of our bedroom, just like staring at our bed. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Get out of here.
I know that kind of scares me.
But yeah.
He probably did sleepwalk and didn't even know why he was there.
Yeah. There was a night where we thought he had woken up. So we thought he was awake as this was going on. And he's screaming bloody murder. And he's like, my stomach hurts, my stomach hurts. And he's just screaming. And my husband and I are both like in the middle of the night trying to calm him down, trying to reassure him, try to put him on the bathroom, like maybe he had a poop. Like we had no idea. This goes on for about an hour. And we're at our wits' end. We're like, okay, we're taking him to the emergency room. The whole ride there, I was holding him because he's hysterically screaming, didn't know what was wrong. I mean, we live 5 minutes away, and we get there, we bring him in, he's still screaming, and the doctors want to do testing to, see what's going on. So they want a urine test or whatever. And so they're giving him like water to drink, and he's like hysterical. So the doctor's like, we'll come back in a few minutes. So they basically told him you either have to drink the water so that you can urinate, or they were going to have to do like a catheter. And that terrified him. And so the doctor leaves. A few minutes later, comes back, and it's almost like Mason just snapped right out of it. And he's looking around. He has no idea where we are, why we're at the doctor, what's going on. Absolute complete confusion. And the doctor is like, this is not even the same kid that was in here a few minutes ago. We're all looking around, completely baffled, no idea what had happened. So he drank his bottle of water, he did the urine test, everything was fine. And we went home completely fucking confused. We had no idea what was going on. It's still a mystery to this day. The only thing that we've chalked it up to was maybe it was some kind of night terror, but it's never happened again. That was the one and only time. Yeah.
Did he recall any of that?
Nothing. He had no idea. I would say he was probably about 4 years old.
He might recall something from 4. Like consciously, he should remember something from that, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's like Jessica. She definitely remembers sleepwalking. He definitely remembers that. Like to this day, she can describe it.
And what about that story when, I don't remember which one of your daughters was on the top bunk, and when they were looking out, they can kind of see a figure. Can Can you tell us that story? And then also, does she remember what that looked like or what it was?
Yeah, this was a few years later. So my third daughter was born by then. And this is getting to be the time where we were thinking about our next move. We were outgrowing our house. The kids were getting a little bit older. And my second husband, he also worked evenings. What is it with these men that are never home at night? But I was in bed. All the kids were in bed, and I woke up to Jessica screaming. And I thought she must have had a nightmare, so I went running in there, and she's on the top bunk. Sherry is on the bottom bunk, and she's kind of sitting up, and she's like beet red, sweating. Like I thought she had a fever, and I thought, oh, maybe she had a nightmare, but she's also sick. And she was screaming about something was coming, and like, where are you, Grandma? You said you would keep me safe. And my mom had recently just passed at this time. And then she'd like say, Mommy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like she couldn't calm down. And then she'd get all hysterical again and crying. And then she kind of got up on her knees and was over the top of the bed looking out the bedroom door, which you can kind of see from that angle. You could have seen through the kitchen into the hallway that would lead to the bathroom, that back door. And I had a living room with like 2 steps down into this living room. And she could kind of see in there, although the house was dark. I didn't go and turn all the lights on when I got up and heard her yelling. So the house is dark. And I'm trying to rationalize with her, like, it's okay, honey, it's okay. And obviously she woke up her older sister. And Sherry still remembers at one point we're trying to calm her down, and it's not working. And I kind of look down and I see Sherry laying there, who, if you know my daughter Sherry, would normally like have an interjection to say something. She laid there mute, just staring with these big blue eyes. And she mouthed, "Taking me out." And I'm like, me too. And so at one point I said, Jessica, there's nothing out there, nothing. So I'm like, I got to go turn the lights on so she can see that she's seeing shadows or whatever she's seeing, to try to get her to calm down. It almost sounds like your son. It's almost like irrationally screaming and you can't reach them somehow, right?
Yeah, that's
And
exactly
part
what
of
it
her
was.
knew that I couldn't, because she'd stop and go, Mommy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And then she'd be hysterical again. Like she couldn't help herself. So I'm going through the kitchen, turning the lights on. And she's like, Mommy, don't do it. Mommy, don't do it. And I like going in the hallway. I flip that light on. I go in the living room and I turn on, now as I'm doing this, I'm telling her there's nothing here. Nothing's going to hurt you. But I was like head to toe goosebumps, like freezing cold. I felt something negative. I truly did, because my body reacted to the room, like from the kitchen to that living room. I have goosebumps talking about it. I got them again. I could feel it, but I wasn't going to let my daughter know that. Either one of those daughters know that. So I came back in, and it took a while, and she finally calmed down. And she said she thought it was almost like a tiger in there. It had big teeth. It was going to like just come at me and tear me apart, is what she thought she saw when she was little.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't asked her if she analyzed that, what it was, but something very bad is what she saw in there. Something wild and that was going to hurt me. And once she calmed down, I realized she wasn't overheated. She didn't feel feverish anymore. She drank some water. She went to sleep. And the next day, it was like nothing had ever happened. She was perfectly fine. So it felt maybe like a night terror, but was part of her knew it, because she kept saying, Mommy, I'm sorry. Mommy, I'm sorry. Like she couldn't stop herself from overreacting. So part of her knew, I can't, this is happening, but she really believed it was her reality in that moment. Like she was seeing that.
Yeah.
And I sat up, I sat in the kitchen. I left the lights on in the living room, and I left the lights on in the kitchen, and I had a cup of tea, and I waited for Ron to get home, my husband. But that's how things progressed.
Yeah, I have 2 stories that relate to the things that you described. So the first one is your daughter on the top bunk looking out and seeing something that really scared her with the teeth. This happened not long ago. Well, a few years ago, but my nephews, they're triplets, so 2 boys and a girl. They were sharing a room. I think they were like 5 years old, and they couldn't sleep. One of them especially, he's very sensitive to the otherworldly, and he would start to scream in the middle of the night. And my uncle would come in, and he'd be sitting up in bed, and he would be clapping, but not awake. It's like a half in, half out kind of thing. And so my uncle would just hug him, and then he would go back to sleep. And this started happening consistently. So my uncle and aunt decided to go to a shaman to go see what was going on because he really would not sleep. And he would tell my uncle and my aunt that Luca is not letting him sleep. Luca climbs all over the walls and he scares him and he's not letting him sleep. And so you had those two incidents that were happening, went to the shaman, and the shaman, the first thing she did was sit up really straight and start clapping. And they're
Oh.
like, okay, so that made it real for them right away. And she said the clapping is a young girl who is attached to my uncle and follows him basically wherever he goes. In a past life, they had an orphanage and they would help lost children. And this is one of those spirits. And she's jumping in to his son's body. And he would clap, it would get their attention, and he would get a hug from Danny. And that was the little girl wanting a hug from Danny.
Oh,
Yeah.
leave my
So
baby alone.
yeah, I think that stopped after visiting the shaman. My uncle acknowledged her and asked, to let him sleep. But Luca kept interfering with the sleep. So they asked me to come over to do a clearing of the house. So I went over there with my sage and my crystals, and I did not like it in there. And that night, I had come home after I did the clearing, came home, went to bed, and in the middle of the night, I heard that whisper, and it was Luca. And I opened my eyes and I saw this black thing crawling on my wall in my bedroom. And I have boundaries. I have very clear boundaries of what I allow into my house. Nothing is ever allowed in my room, but he broke those boundaries and whatever it was. I don't know if it's a he, but broke the boundaries and was in my room climbing on my walls. At like 2 or 3 in the morning, got my sage, turned on all the lights. Max was like, what's happening? I was like, Luca's here. It followed me here and then broke my boundaries. And I've never really had anything do that. And it was crawling on my wall, just like Logan had described it. So I never experienced it again since, but I felt the way that it looked resembled the way that I pictured what your daughter saw on the bunk bed. I don't know why, but it's just, I felt like it was the same entity, the same kind of entity or species, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
So creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something with big teeth.
Yeah. And I didn't see its face. I didn't see any face because it was crawling on the wall, but I didn't want to see the face. Did not want to. And then the second story is more of a loving story. I was working night shifts at the detox center, and sleep deprivation is a real thing, just like you described. On my way home on the highway, I would finish at 7 a.m. and I couldn't sleep during the day. It was really hard. Like maybe I'd get a couple hours and it was broken sleep. So I was just going on this pattern of no sleep. And driving home on the highway, I started seeing somebody on the highway just standing there looking at me. And it was always when I was about to fall asleep at the wheel. And
Oh.
it would startle me to the point where I had this like adrenaline rush of what was that? Why was she on the side of the road? She was always in this white gown, just like looked casual. And then when I would look in the review mirror, there was no one there. So I didn't want to tell anyone because I didn't want to get thrown into the loony bin. For some reason, that was a big fear of mine. So I just left it and it continued to happen. And then one day she was trying to signal something to me. I got home and I was feeling really depressed and really just disconnected from life, I think, or disconnected from my body. And I was living with Max. He was working during the day. So I was trying to sleep and I heard him come home. He walked into the bedroom door, came down, kissed me on the cheek, and said, I love you. And it made me feel this immense amount of love and that I was worth more than dealing with this. So I decided in that moment that I'm going to call my doctor and just tell her, if she says that I'm got issues mentally, then maybe I do. I wasn't sure about spirituality at that point. So I got out to go tell him everything that has been happening. And he wasn't there. And I was like, there's no way that he could have left in that amount of time. So I called him and I was like, yeah, where are you? And he's like, I'm at work. And he was at work. I could hear all the machines going because he worked in construction. And I was like, were you just here? Did you come home for lunch? And he's like, no, I've been at work since this morning. I don't know who did it, but whoever that entity was or spirit guide didn't scare me because I thought it was Max. And I called my doctor right after and saw her. And all she did was take me off night shifts. Gave me a note saying she can't work night shifts. And that was it. So I think that spirit saved my life quite a few times or saved me from getting into some kind of accident.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, that's a nice one to have around.
Yeah. Definitely a protector looking over you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think you said also that Cindy had felt her bed shaking at one
Oh,
point.
yeah. That was like
So
a
creepy.
phenomenon that would happen in one bedroom upstairs in particular. My sister at one point rented up there and she had a couple of different roommates. Surprisingly, both of them were Melissas, but they weren't the same Melissa. But The first Melissa up there was somebody that I worked with. And she said she was the only one home. She was upstairs. She was getting ready to go out and she was ironing in the kitchen. So she's kind of wandering around, putting makeup on, ironing whatever she's wearing to go out. And all of a sudden she heard somebody say, Mary. She said it was like creepy sing-songy like that. And then she was like, what? And thinking, okay, I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that. And she's like ironing, getting ready. And Mary. And she said, so then I said, Mary isn't home and she lives downstairs. And by that time, she's like just about ready to go. And she goes, and then I just left. I just left. I went out. I'm like, well, thanks for telling them where I live.
Yeah. My
Thanks,
God.
Melissa.
I mean, the fact that she responded in such a way.
Well, she didn't know what to do. She was like, first
Yeah.
time, okay, I probably didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Somebody singing Mary's name. And then she heard it again. And that's when she answered. She's not
Telling
home.
them.
And she lives downstairs. So go the F down there.
Yeah, telling them where to
Live up
find
here.
you.
Yeah. When the first Melissa had the other bedroom that faced the backyard. And then my sister had the other bedroom off the kitchen, which kind of faced the side yard. That's where they were. They were like on corners. And Cindy would tell me, and I don't know how my sister lived up there. I don't know to this day because she stayed there a few years. But she said she would wake up because her bed would be shaking. Like if somebody very strong was like shaking the bed.
Oh my God.
And she would wake up to that. It would wake her up, that movement. And I'm like, geez, Cindy. She had a little kitten at the time, Missy. And, she would buy gallons of milk. And I don't know if you know, but when you take that plastic, you unscrew it, there's like that little ring that's left. Okay. She would always pull that off and like toss it in the air. And then her cat would bat it around. And
Yeah.
she loved it, like, on the kitchen floor, because normally on the carpet, it would get stuck. It didn't fling unless Cindy picked it up and, would wing it and the cat would just like go chase it. So one day she was in the living room. She said, and I'm kind of laying on my couch and I hear the cat playing in the kitchen.
Yeah.
I turn and that ring comes flinging from the hallway into the living room and the cat like running after it. She was like, how did that happen? And then there were two closets in that hallway. And then the door for downstairs and then the door for a bathroom. And she said, I'm sitting in the living room watching TV and all of a sudden I hear a click and the door would open to one of those closets. She goes, I got up, I closed it. I made sure like it's not popping open because sometimes doors can do that, right? But she would hear it go click and it would do it again and it would open very slowly. Like, what in the heck? That happens a lot.
That's very creepy to me. Like when doors and stuff open or just the sound, the idea of it. And then you're too afraid to blink because if I blink and then I open my eyes again, something's going to be there.
Right. Well, she just was trying to find out, why is this happening? Why is it like the rational explanation for it? And she'd get up and she'd close it and try to kind of push on it to see if it would pop open. And it didn't. She'd have to turn the handle and pull it. And then it did it a few times. There was another time that Melissa, the first Melissa that lived there, her boyfriend was painting that hallway. And it was a Saturday morning. So he was up there painting. And all of a sudden, I hear a knock at my door in my living room. And it's her boyfriend. It's Daryl standing there. He said, did the kids come upstairs and knock on the door and then running away? And I'm like, no, they've been in the living room. They haven't left. They're still in their pajamas watching cartoons. And he goes, it was like, I knew there was somebody at the door because it was, but every time I opened it and he was in the hallway where the door was, he'd open it and there's nobody there. I'm like, you would have heard them running down the stairs, if anything, because they're not subtle if they're trying to, be silly. No, they didn't do that. But he always called the ghost Casper. He goes, I guess Casper's at it again because, things would happen. Eventually that Melissa moved out and another Melissa moved in. And when they made that change, my sister decided, I'm taking the other bedroom. It's a little bigger, has a better closet anyway. And I'll let this Melissa have this bedroom, the other one that faces the side yard. And Melissa said that her boyfriend would not stay there anymore because he would sleep over because they'd be in bed and they'd wake up to the bed shaking. And Cindy said, oh yeah, I can validate that does happen. It did happen to me when I was in there too. So it was a
Unreal.
thing that happened in that room
Yeah.
for whatever reason. I can't tell you why.
The fact that it happens to multiple people and always in the same room, that's intense.
Yeah. I mean, and this is something that Lou, her boyfriend, did not know had happened. Like Melissa wasn't going to freak him out. And it happened to them while they
Mhm.
were in bed. And Lou was like, I can't. I
No.
can't. So
Way to go, Lou, 'cause
yeah,
I
he
would.
was like, no, he doesn't want to stay here because the bed shakes. Oh my God.
Wow.
Another time, and this is before my sister changed roommates, she said she was in the kitchen and she was listening to music, but she had it on real low because Melissa, the other roommate, was sleeping in the afternoon. All of a sudden, she thought she heard somebody go, sit, like a loud whisper. And so she's like looking around. She turned the music down, thinking maybe Melissa said something. And then it was still quiet. So she went about and she heard it again. And it was like, sit. So finally she goes, I went over to like Melissa's bedroom door and opened it to see if she was like kind of yelling to me quietly. And she was sound asleep, like she wasn't speaking, but she had heard something call her name. And not a sing-songy voice. It was more of a loud, like
Yeah.
get your attention kind of thing. It's like,
Wow.
okay, all right.
No, thank you.
I know.
Wasn't there a story about you and your husband hearing the same whisper at the same time? Can you tell us that one?
Yeah, I think this is before my third daughter was born. So the two other little girls, we had eaten supper. And I don't know what we were looking at, but we were standing by my front door, which is the hallway off my living room. We were looking out the screen door, looking at something. So the little girls are in front of me. I'm standing behind them. Behind me are the stairs that go up to the second apartment. To my left is the living room door, which was open because Ron was standing there with his cup of coffee. So I don't remember what we were looking at outside. And all of a sudden, in this ear, in my left ear, it sounded like somebody whispered like that, only like it was like a loud whisper. And I kind of like turned my head and looked and kind of like stepped back because it did it twice. And as I'm turning and I'm doing that, I see Ron. He's like stepping back with his cup of coffee in his hand. I'm like, he looked identical to like what I did. I'm like, what was that? What did you hear? He goes, I don't know. It sounded like a loud whisper, but I'm telling myself it was the TV. I'm like, Ron, that wasn't the TV. I don't know, Mary. I'm telling myself it was the TV. That was I kind of wish I knew what that thing said. I have no idea. But it's weird that it was in my ear and in his ear. Like,
Yep.
how does that happen? I don't know. And the little girls fiddling around in front of me, they didn't hear anything. They didn't hear
Interesting.
it. Yeah. It was loud whisper. You couldn't understand it. And it did it twice. It did it once and then it whispered again really loud. That like if somebody was really close to your ear whispering, but you can't understand what they just said to you.
Mhm.
That's what it sounded like. So
So I have a question for you, Mary. And if you don't want to talk about this one, we don't have to. But the last part of your email to us, you mentioned a garden gnome.
oh yeah.
And so if you're not comfortable talking about it, we don't have to, but it's entirely up to
I
you.
don't mind telling you about it because that's probably the creepiest, like the cherry on top of the sundae for me about that whole living situation. We had moved out, and by this time, my two older daughters were teenagers. So it was many years later. And I was washing dishes and putting them in the dishwasher. They were sitting at the table. Jessica and Sherry were like talking about, they were hanging out with friends that prior weekend and they started reminiscing about the haunted house we lived in. And they kind of like went back and forth recalling things, telling these friends about it. And Sherry said, Mom, I got to ask you because when I brought it up, Jessica remembered. She said, that garden gnome that you had in the basement, that thing was the freakiest thing. And as soon as I said it, Jessica goes, oh my God, I remember that. I remember that. And she said, every time I'd go down there, it felt like it was in a different spot. And if I had to get clothes out of the dryer, I would like just run, grab the clothes out of the dryer, run upstairs with the clothes. And it felt like the eyes would follow you. And Jessica goes, yeah, Mom, that thing was so creepy. Whatever happened with that thing? Whose was that? And I'm like, I stopped what I was doing. Like my back was to them as they're talking and, I'm kind of loading the dishwasher and I stopped. And it's like, I knew rationally I had never had a gnome, a garden. I've never had any kind of garden, anything. There was never one stored down there. I know this, but when they said it, there was like some like back of my mind, like I knew exactly what they were talking about. And all I can see is those sharp teeth. And I turned around and looked at him. I'm like, I never had a garden gnome. And we all just kind of like were quiet and we all just kind of looked at each other. And I can't explain the feeling that I'm like, I know what they're talking about though. But
Mhm.
I know rationally, I did not own one. No, nobody stored one down there, but I knew what they were talking about. It's almost like part of me doesn't want to remember that.
Yeah.
Like it's a memory, but I think it's better off just staying put.
Yeah,
I don't want to give too much energy to that.
for sure.
But that, yeah,
Creepy.
kind of freaked us all out.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
oh,
Ooh.
I know. I don't know what that was.
Never gonna
Probably
look at
I
a
don't want to.
garden gnome again when I go to the
Well, that's
store.
just it. Years later, my husband's grandmother had these like little elf ceramic things. They're not gnomes, but these little ceramic elves that she gave me. And the girls didn't even want those. And they're cute. They're like little elves. So I have them put away. But they didn't even want those like sitting around. I'm like, oh, they're not gnomes. They're not creepy gnomes.
Oh my God. Yeah, that probably really triggered like some kind of fear in them for sure. Oh my God.
Yeah. And they both had the same memory. That was the first time they had ever said it out loud. They had never talked about that. And we had talked about that house quite a bit because Jessica would have like bad dreams that she was back at that house and that her younger siblings, like Courtney and Tom, she was trying to get them out of the house. You know, years later, she's still having occasional bad dreams about that house.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
It was
It's,
like a perfect storm, I think,
yeah.
of like stress,
Hmm.
a lot going on. We're all very sensitive. All three of us are. So, like, you're already sensitive to anything that's there.
Mhm.
And I had found out that years ago when she was like in high school, that whoever owned the house, they had had a seance in that house. So who knows what they opened up. And I know that I am not the only family to have lived in this house that must have experienced it because I was waiting at my daughter's bus stop around the block. And one of the grandparents to one of the little boys that lived at the other end of the street was standing with me and she said, Mary, my sons were talking about a house on the street. What's your address? And I told her. She goes, oh my God, it is your house. They say your house is haunted. Is it? And I said, we think so.
Yeah.
And that's all I said. So like there were people that would bring it up about this
Yeah.
house.
It must have been a
So
portal then. Some
mhm.
kind of portal
Yeah.
or something.
I feel like there was. And then when there's like negative things going on in your life and
Mhm.
it makes you vulnerable, that
Oh,
can
yeah.
bring the negative through, especially when you're more vulnerable and more open. And I didn't know about protecting or cleansing my space at that time. I didn't do any of that. Like so many little incidents because it's so many years. I do remember coming home. My kids weren't home, and this is before I was married. So I was living there, just me and the girls. And I had a bunch of pictures of us on the wall, like a collage on the wall. I remember coming home, and those pictures looked like they had fallen off, but they were stacked up on the floor. Like, it was so bizarre. How do they fall off in different positions and be stacked up like that?
So they neatly stack them up?
Yeah,
No.
and
Why?
I don't have an explanation. I didn't see it happen. I didn't hear it happen. But yeah, I walked into it. I just don't think things fall off the wall and do that. I don't
No.
know. I don't know how that would happen. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
pictures
know.
don't fall off the wall and stack themselves.
No, they couldn't have. And you kind of look around. It's like, somebody here? Nobody's here.
And
Just
why would
me.
they do that?
And why would they do that?
For sure, it had to be a portal type situation to have that much energy.
Yep, that's what I thought. One day, Ron and I came home and it was fall time or early spring. So it wasn't really nice out. It was kind of cold and it's Buffalo. And my sister comes running down the upstairs apartment. And that's when she told me that she was sitting in her bedroom and she had the front bedroom, the one facing the backyard, not the bed shaking room. And she was living there alone at that time. So it was in between having a roommate. So she used that other spare room is where the cat's litter would be And then on the other side of the wall was her food dish so that it wasn't in the little kitchen. And she'd leave the door open and Missy would go in and out there, use the litter or when she would eat. So she was in her bedroom at her art desk drawing. And she knew the cat was next to her because there was a plastic bag and she was like batting it around and kind of playing with this thing next to her. And all of a sudden, that door to the spare bedroom, the one where the bed shakes in, slammed closed, she said. It startled her. The cat stopped what it was doing, like, what was that? And she went out there and that door was closed and the cat was meowing. And at that point, she heard the front door and ran down and said, you wouldn't believe what just happened. She goes, and Missy was meowing up there. So we went up to investigate, and sure enough, the cat would not go near that room. And I've never seen a cat poof up like that. She's a short hair cat, but the hair on that tail was like poof. And I went in there and I flicked the light on in there and I'm like calling for Missy and she wouldn't come. And she was just meowing like in alarm at the room. I'm like, what the heck? I have no idea. It only happened once like that.
Cats can see.
They can.
I know. And whatever it was seeing was like, you know, like,
didn't
nah,
like.
no, you get
Yeah.
out. And obviously whatever was in there wasn't in there all the time because the cat would go in there willingly. And that door never closed by itself. I mean, there was no reason for it to slam like that, but it slammed with force, she said.
Ugh.
Like,
Scary.
it scared the heck out of both of them.
As it should.
Yeah.
It was definitely to get your attention, and it got your attention, and it lingered, whatever it was.
Creepy.
I know. Those kind of things can happen no matter where you live, right?
Mhm.
Or what building you're in. I think there's just spirit around all the time.
Yeah.
It's happened in this house that I live in. Nothing as intense as that. But I remember my daughter, Courtney, my third daughter, she was living here. Thomas and I had gone to bed. Courtney was at work, but she got home around 10:30, 11. She said she had stopped at the stop sign, which is a street where, like, if she stopped right there, she could see our house, our driveway. She said, and I look and I see these two guys with hoodies on, like go in our side door. So she thought it was Thomas and one of his friends. So she pulled in, she came in and like everything was quiet and everything was dark. And she thought Thomas was messing with her. Like, where are they? I saw them go in here, right? And so she like burst into his room. I saw you guys. What are you doing? Like, she didn't want them to scare her, is what it was. And he was in bed. Like, nobody was here. He was in bed. She comes in my room and she goes, oh my God. Like, she gets me up and tells me what happens. Thomas is like, Courtney, there was nobody there. And the door was locked. Like, nobody came in my house, but she saw two dark figures come into my house.
Yep.
I don't know.
That would freak me out.
Yep.
Courtney experiences that where she sees spirit very visually. She was babysitting for a friend of the family. And Barbara had two boys and a younger girl. And they were probably from 9 to 5 ages, not little kids. So she would play hide and seek in the house with them. And they had a finished basement. So there was a TV down there. There was like a little office set up, couch. It was like a very nice finished basement. So they would play hide and seek in the basement, turn all the lights off. And so she goes, it was my turn to find everybody. And I'm walking by and she goes, and I see Julia under the desk. And she goes, Julia, I see you under the desk, like crouching down there. And then Julia popped up from the other side of the couch and said, I'm not under there. And so Courtney goes, Mom, I clearly saw her hiding, a little blonde girl hiding underneath there. So she flicked on all the lights and goes, you know what? Let's play upstairs and we're going to leave the lights on. Like, she didn't tell him. She didn't even tell Barbara because at the time they were moving to Florida. So her husband had already moved and she was like finishing out the school year with the kids and going to move there. She goes, I didn't even tell Barbara. But she goes, so one day I'm talking to Barbara and their little girl was playing with her tablet at the kitchen table and the two boys come running up from the basement. And she goes, and the door bursts open and the two boys run up and she sees that little blonde girl and this little blonde boy run after them. And she goes, I clearly saw them. And she goes, my eyes got big. And I looked at Barbara and Barbara goes, what did you see? She goes, what do you mean? She goes, Courtney, I could tell by looking at you, you saw something. So Courtney explained to her, she goes, look, I told her the story about seeing that little girl playing hide and seek and that every once in a while when the kids are playing, she sees more than 3 kids. She sees this little girl. And I'm telling you, I think her name is Hope. And the little boy, I don't think he has a name. And Barbara who is a very strong Polish woman, she said, got very emotional.
Mm.
And the story is that she had lost a child in between the last one. She was pregnant. Her and her husband one night had a dream the same night about the baby, and it was a little girl. And they decided then and there they were going to name her Hope. And then she ended up losing the baby. But they never told anybody about that shared dream that they had, and that they had decided we're going to call this little girl Hope. And then she said her brother, his wife, he had a couple of boys, but they had lost a baby too, and it was a boy, but they didn't name the baby. And Courtney said, well, I know her name is Hope, and the little boy does not have a name. Barbara said, you know what? It's so funny because sometimes I will get up in the middle of the night and I'm kind of like walking down the hallway, and it'll feel like something just like kind of whooshes by me. So I have sensed that before. And Barbara did share with her, they had like a birthday party with all the family over one time. And one of her nephews had asked his mom, who is that kid over there? And there wasn't anybody there. Like, he saw him, but didn't even know that it was a spirit. So that's how strong that was.
Wow.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing those with us in your
Yes.
own
Thank
words
you.
and
Oh,
voice.
sure.
We'll plan a chat so that we can all just get together and hang out, and
Oh my
maybe we
God,
could do
yeah.
it at night with a candle and just see what happens. Who knows?
Oh, that would be cool, wouldn't it?
That'd be
Yeah.
so fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's it for today's episode. Until next time, stay curious.